Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Una Osili of Lilly School of Philanthropy.
Hey, welcome everyone. I am thrilled to be here, and you are going to hear from the most amazing panel. All the panels are amazing, but you're about to hear from an extraordinary group of activists, leaders, funders, and donors. So I'd like to welcome our panel. Iara is a founder of the JustFund, and she's going to share her story. We have Jennifer Risher, who is also the founder of Half My Daff. You might have heard of that during the pandemic. And of course, our very own Glen Galaich, who is one of the originators at the ground level of GPF. So we have him to thank for a lot of what we see today, as well as CEO of the Stupski Foundation. So give them a round of applause. So I want to join Andy, who spoke yesterday, in saying that I've asked all the panelists to be bold, but also to be personal, to take this conversation to a very personal level. And they will do that. But I also want to thank the GPF for bringing us this opportunity, giving us the chance to share our stories. So I am an economist by training, but I'm also a researcher, and I'm the Associate Dean at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, the world's first school on philanthropy. But today, before I got here at the conference, I called my dad, and I told him about the conference, and the reason I did that was because I realized that today we want to change the game. We want to change the narrative, but we also want to shift power. And I realized that I had the fortune of being raised by parents who taught us to be bold, to challenge the status quo, to challenge how things were done, and to seek a different world and build a better world. Now, my father was the first one to be educated in his family. Not the first one to graduate from college or the first one to graduate from high school, and an education period, meaning his mother could not read or write. His father died when he was very young. And so he encouraged all of us, not just me, but the entire family, to seek excellence. And he made sure that every single member of his family, all the nieces and nephews, had a college education. So in one generation, the family's trajectory changed. Oh, can you hear me? Better, okay, let's see. So sorry. Okay, is that better? All right. Well, I'm going to fast forward the tape. In addition to being a researcher, I'm also very passionate about philanthropy. Not just giving through institutions, but giving that's done personally. And why is that? Because I learned that at home. My parents were investors in their community. They supported others. They mentored others. They started organizations. And all of us, all 5 children, are philanthropists in their own right. We all are very committed to the communities that we live in. Yes. So let me just fast forward and say that this took me into research, but also taught me about what I'm going to call not just bold giving, but all-in giving. All-in giving is where you use all of your assets, not just your grant budget, but all the resources you have, your time, your talent, your treasure, your testimony, and your trust. So that's what we'll talk about today, and I'm so pleased to have this wonderful panel to share that with. We're going to start with Iara, and she's going to share her story, why she started the JustFund, and what that has accomplished. So Iara, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Yada, like yada, yada, yada. I'm the founder and CEO of JustFund, which is a tech-first solution designed to streamline the grant-making process for folks who are distributing funds and seeking funds, and center equity and trust along the process. I've been building nonprofits for 25 years, and over the course of those 2 decades, have personally experienced and been continually surprised by the chronic underfunding of communities of color. Right, the historical exclusion of communities of color by philanthropy. And I, in 2015, joined a network, an incredible, beautiful network of individuals and institutions trying to move money in solidarity with social movements. Some of you may know Solidare Network. And this is a very passionate, incredible community, really wanting to align its values with its practice with its values. But we had a process where we would take in 300 proposals at a time. We'd fund 15, and 285 incredible organizations working on the front lines that the issues we cared most about would go right in the trash can. Right? And of the 15 that we did fund, we weren't fully funding those. So we started to envision, could we have a technology where we could get these organizations in front of our members, 180 members, who surely someone would find a match with one of those 285 sitting in the trash can. We could actually amplify them and find more funding opportunities for those groups. And meanwhile, we were having conversations with colleagues. Defending the Dream Fund, the Emergent Fund, where they were funding some of the same organizations, but using different systems. So here we were, funding the same organizations but using different proposal application processes, making these tiny organizations go through all of this process just to get money to them. And we said, hey, you know what? What if we did a common proposal? I know Philanthropy's been talking about it for 30 years, but we're just going to do it and see what happens. And so we did. In 2017, we launched the common proposal, which has become now JustFund. We ran 800 organizations through the portal. We saved them years of time applying just in that one grant cycle that we chose to run. Fast forward to today, we have this incredible values-aligned community of funders wanting to reset philanthropy for good. We have run over 300 grant cycles. We have over 120 funds using the common proposal saying enough. We don't want groups spending 15 to 25 hours applying for funding. Let them spend an hour, and hey, while they're here applying to Decolonizing Wealth, let them apply to Emergent Fund and Amplify Fund and Constellations Fund and every other funding partner that we have at JustFund. And we're excited about the fact that this community has moved almost $180 million to chronically underfunded communities. 58% of those dollars come from what we call leveraged grants. That means a group comes in to apply to Fund A, but gets funded by Fund B or Fund C or by an individual donor. 58% of those dollars are coming from groups just sitting there, not having to do more labor to get funded. That's extraordinary. And all in, we've saved 180,000 hours of time. Calculate that quickly in your mind. That's 22 years of time that groups would have had to spend applying for funds that they can now put into mission advancing work, which is our purpose here. So we're thrilled about this community of values-aligned funders really wanting to reset philanthropy for good, and very excited about the next steps as we start to work with donor networks like Donors of Color and Social Venture Partners International to bring actual individual donors into the portal who can now search using 26 different filters. 7,000 organizations in the portal. They can come in and find and fund and move money to new groups that are new to their portfolio. So we're thrilled about what philanthropy can do when we start to take action together, be bold together, and really work to center equity and trust in our process.
Wonderful, yay. Awesome. Well, I am so pleased to share Jennifer's story, but I'll let her take the lead here. I already heard about Have My Dad from my research perch, but tell us about this journey. What led you to start the organization? What have you learned during the process? And how have your own personal values shaped the work that you're doing?
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to share my story. I think we learn from each other's stories. And over the last few months, years, I have been really focused on shifting money and power to close the racial wealth gap. And I've been doing that in three ways. And it started with me sharing my personal story, the story of the emotional and personal side of money. Money is a very sensitive subject. And I wrote a book sharing my story. I'm now working with individuals and families to help them understand their own stories and to get comfortable with money. That might sound strange, but it has to start with a comfort level, and it also has to start with conversations, because we can't keep money a taboo subject. We have to stop not talking about wealth. So it's really helping families, because when you don't talk about something, it tends to loom large in your mind and take on a life of its own, or it tends to lurk in the shadows in the dark, and that's where shame lives. So I'm helping people move money into the light so that we can put it in its place where it belongs as a tool. So I'm working with people to move out of shame, guilt, fear, a desire to keep money hidden, so that they can step into real meaning and purpose and action with their money. And as I've been talking, I can feel that power and how empowering it is, how much clarity I've gotten, how much more confidence I've gotten. And it's caused me to look at my money and say, what can I do with my money to create the society I want to live in, a more equitable society? Where is my money invested? I want to get out of anything that's doing harm. And more energy, I feel, is putting money into places that can really change the power imbalance. Women get 3% of venture capital dollars. Women of color get less than a percentage. This is a crime. I have been now investing in first-time women of color fund managers who then will turn around and invest in founders and entrepreneurs of color who are creating a more equitable society. And that feels really empowering. Another way to move money is through philanthropy, as you all know. But you've got to get the money moving. And so with COVID happened, my husband and I were sitting in our backyard. We were sheltering in place. It was April 2020. There was more uncertainty in our world than we'd ever faced in our lifetime. Why was not more money moving? There was so much need. There was so much, uncertainty that my husband runs a nonprofit. He could feel the funding drying up. I had doubled down on places that I already gave, accelerated those 3-year gifts, but we needed to do more. And so we were like, what can we do? Were we just going to give to nonprofits? Yes, but how can we amplify our own giving? And we're very aware of, at the time, the $120 billion sitting in donor-advised funds. How are we going to activate that money? So we put up money of our own, and we said, here's this money. It's a pot of money, and it's all about matching grants. Anyone who's going to move money from your DAF to nonprofits now, commit to halving your DAF, we'll give you a match. Give wherever you want, as long as it doesn't promote hate speech or gun violence. We said, give wherever you want. Commit to suspending down half your DAF. And we started in May of 2020, and we ended September 30th of 2020, and moved $8.6 million, which was a success. Bigger success is hearing how much people were energized by this. This is the nudge I needed. This is inspirational. I'm sitting around the dinner table with my adult kids talking about where we want to give. When you do this next year, and that hadn't been our plan, but we got so much energy around this, felt so much community building that we've continued with Half My DAF. We now just ended year 3, and we've moved $33 million.
Thank you, Jennifer. I am already excited about what's going to happen, not just this year, but even in the future. So Glen, you are also impressive in the work you've done over the decades, starting with founding and helping start this organization as a program officer. So we have you to thank, of course, but also your work as CEO of the Stupski Foundation that has committed to a spend-down model, and I think they've also put a year and a goal to do that. So share with us your own journey, how you got into this work, and what has really inspired you over the course of this journey.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming out today. It's a beautiful site. When we did the first conference, it was down at the brand new, never been done before, Ariaga Center at Stanford. So I don't know if anyone's been there. It's a beautiful site, and it was the first time they had a conference, and GPF was their first conference. So I don't want to take credit for what you see around you right now. There was some applaud for me. I don't work on the team now, and it's a great team, and they've done a great job. Let's see where to begin here. First of all, it's humbling to be on the stage with the three of you. We are but one of, I don't know how many people know of how many foundations there are in America.
There are about 86,000.
My last count was 150,000 private foundations. I don't want to, you're the researcher, so I don't want to be, I am but a practitioner. And I was struck just recently, I was at the Family Philanthropy Conference here in town 2 weeks ago, and Don Chen, who runs CERDNA, a great foundation out of the East Coast, was very happy about the fact that 800 foundations at the time of COVID had signed a pledge to reduce restrictions, to give more, and be more involved. So while I was sitting there, this might be why I'm flawed in my numbers. When I heard him say that, I thought, 800, that seems like such a high number. We should be proud of that. Sorry, this thing is loose behind me. We should be proud of that. I wonder how many foundations there are. What is 800 against the backdrop of the total number of private foundations that actually give a shit? Turns out it's rounding error. 150,000 foundations that earn $500 billion a year. And most of them will sit on $1.2 trillion in assets every year. I find that troubling. We are tax shelters. We call ourselves foundations, but we're tax shelters. We are here to dodge government payment for the wealth of people who made a lot of money in the United States. And the interesting part of it all is that it's not just sitting there. It's actually working. $1.2 trillion a year is working. And while I don't have the evidence to support it, although evidence these days seems to be irrelevant when making arguments in America, I don't have that evidence to share with you bit by bit by bit by bit. But I'm willing to bet that of that 1.2 trillion, a good chunk of it is working in contrast, in counter to the missions we all put on our websites. And we're only going to move 5% on average because the government says we have to every year. In fact, before 1970-ish, there were no requirements on foundations to move money. It was totally designed to hoard and shelter. It's where people dodged estate taxes. It's how they guaranteed that the kids got to do something with their lives, run the family business, whatever. It's what the whole system was set up to do. So my realization very recently, which I'm in the middle of doing some writing, and I was trying to figure out, like, what is my point as I'm writing this book right now? And my point that hit me was, we are but part of a financial system. The philanthropy part is just a myth, really, that we tell ourselves. We really are financial experts. We're experts at moving capital to grow more capital, to do things that are probably running in contrast to what we put on our website. So when I thought about the name of this session and why in the world anyone would invite me to be on the stage, I guess we're bold at the Stupski Foundation because we actually do philanthropy as a foundation. We move all of our assets to a mission, despite the fact that a lot of the money historically has been tied up in very non-mission investments. So we are going to spend down before the end of the decade. I would be surprised if we make it even to the edge of the decade. I think we're probably going to spend down much sooner than that. But very recently, we made the decision to expedite as quickly as we can. And we did that because we started to realize that there's one really important question that we should be answering as foundations all the time. Why is it more important for us to have the money in our bank accounts than the organizations that are actually doing the work? So I ask that of my staff all the time. They probably don't like it anymore, but we will be in a conversation and they'll be questioning, should they move capital at this point? What pacing should they put on it? And I just ask them, is it more important for us to hold on to the money than the organizations that we work with? So then, the final thing I'll say is that to do that, it means you've got to get out of everything as quickly as you can. So we are in rapid divestment from everything we're in. And what's really interesting is, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know how much other foundation heads know where their money is when it's invested by an investment advisor. I'm learning every day what we're invested in, and I'm not happy with what I'm seeing. Because every time you call your money from an investment person, they're not happy about it. And they tell you all the things you're going to undercut if you take it away from them, which I'm really happy to do every time. It's like one of the best phone calls I get. Whenever I get a phone call saying, you know, doing this, you're going to lose money, you're not going to grow as much, and you're certainly not going to help us to advance the mission of our blah-blah-dee, blah-da-dee, blah, regeneration-y, fundy thing. And it's great when it goes away, and it turns out it's probably working and has been working in counter to us. So I guess what's different about us, what I suppose makes us bold, is we're moving the capital to the very communities we've been talking about up here, getting out of the things that are going to help us grow, which are just working against us and society, and we're going to get it done before the end of the decade.
I love that. So this is a moment to ask those tough questions. If you haven't asked your investment advisors, that's an assignment for all of us to ask those tough questions. So let's start with another tough question. Philip, actually, and the team at GPF encouraged us to put those questions on the table. And one question that has troubled me the most is who is getting the funding? And we'll get to the investment side as well, and who is not getting the funding. So look at your grantees and look at who is at the table and who's not at the table. Many years ago, this was not even a question that anyone asked. It was just assumed that the same organizations would get funded year over year. But increasingly, I am actually very optimistic. I have seen a change since COVID, where more organizations are funding Black and Brown-led organizations, Global South-led organizations, and even causes that historically were not funded. So there is a tidal wave of progress. I want to acknowledge that first, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So let's start with that very pressing question. Who is getting the funding and who is not? And one point that I was very fortunate to have a conversation with Iara just earlier, and she highlighted that we also need to look at historical patterns and how we can, going forward, address them. So just because your organization hasn't funded certain populations doesn't mean you can't do it. And it's not just about who's getting the funding. What about your board members? Do you have a diverse board? What about your staff? These are all questions that are at the heart of this conversation. So I'm going to start with Iara. Who's getting the funding and who's not? And how is the JustFund shifting power and changing the narrative there?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question. And, you know, depending on the study that you look at, we know that 4 to 8% of all of our philanthropic dollars are going to communities of color, you know. So if we're surprised that we're not winning on the issues we're trying to solve, we shouldn't be. Because if we want to win on the issues we care about, we need to be funding people who are closest to the issues because they're closest to the right solutions. We need to be funding people who have direct lived experience in the problem because they're going to get us closer to those solutions. So, I mean, the historic, you know, exclusion of communities of color has led us to this point where we're in crisis on almost every issue we care about. And it's not just, you know, this, I think we should be funding communities of color, not just because there's this DEI push or this like interest now in funding racial equity. It's strategic, it's how we win. You know, and the chronic underfunding is devastating to our communities for sure, and it's going to continue to lead us down this path where we're not making the progress on the issues that we care most about. And I think the reasons why, there are so many, but you know, we fund who we know and our network. So when our staff and our teams are a certain demographic, we're going to be funding within those demographics. It's harder to fund people who are not like you. And most of our cultures in philanthropy are white-dominated cultures, right? So we are more comfortable with people who understand that language of, tell me about your ROI. Tell me about your proof of concept. Those kinds of terminologies, the way we talk, the way we think, we're going to be much more comfortable funding folks who understand that language and not the folks who are actually closest to the issues, closest to the solution. So we do have a lot of work to do. And I think, you know, a lot of us are now talking about our practice and how do we move money more equitably, but it's also about our cultures. It starts with our cultures inside our institutions, our structures, our practices, of course, our leadership. But let's not just get stuck with who we're moving money to, but also the how we move those resources. And I think when we start to answer those questions, we're going to see more money flowing. We'll start to unlock the dam, you know, the money flowing and break the dam in terms of resources moving to the communities that we were designed to support.
Let me just ask Glenn and also Jennifer, any additional thoughts you'd want to add on how we can change who is getting funded and specifically who has not gotten funded in the past and how we can change that picture going forward?
I can share what we've seen through Half My DAF over the last 3 years. When we first started and said, give wherever you want, people generally gave to what the research tells us they give to community, then education, and then at this very small little sliver to racial justice type of organizations. So the second year, we put pots of money into Half My DAF that was focused on amplifying these different areas: education in underserved communities, climate and environment, racial justice, reproductive health. And so people gave, we matched wherever they gave, but then we really focused on these areas, and we were able to match every single grant given to racial justice, which is great, but it does speak to the fact that there wasn't as many grants going to those organizations as there should have been. But with Half My DAF, you can really funnel your money to the cause area you're interested in. And we're actually seeking more a partner or partners who can come in and not only raise the awareness of the need to move the now $160+ billion sitting in DAFs, but to know that you can focus that money. You can say, I'm going to give my money to go towards racial justice, climate and environment, women's rights. So this is a platform that allows for real focus and amplification of places where, the funding is not going and needs to go.
Absolutely. So one question I have heard a lot is, I want to fund more Black-led, Brown-led organizations. I want to fund more organizations in the Global South, but I don't know how to do it. Well, Glenn, you have figured out how to partner with community organizations and how to work with organizations that are already doing the work, the grassroots organizations. Maybe share just very quickly how you have accomplished this or where you'd like to go in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we are merely following others' leads. I can't possibly take credit for us figuring that out. I kind of want to come back to your original question.
Yes.
I'll move into that, which is, I really think the way this has to change, again, I led with this in the last answer, is there's just got to be a change in the mythology of what we're doing. And by that I mean, I think, just looking at the foundation side of it, the donor advised fund and then the individual donor giving is its own story. But on the foundation side, I think people just simply don't understand what foundation money is. Even when you look at philanthropic media, who I greatly admire, and if there are any in here, I hope you're doing well. My communications director told me to say that. If you look at the way stories are written in philanthropy, it's always about such and such a person, usually two white older people, they gave money to something. That's not correct. They gave money to one thing. It was the foundation they created and put themselves on it as the governing board. The foundation at that point is a public asset, a charitable asset that they are stewarding. It is not their money anymore. What they got was a kick-ass tax benefit. They should say thank you, and in my view, go away. Not because they're bad people, but because they are not likely going to be in touch with the communities that are most under stress in our country. They are not, in my experience, going to know, and I'll speak for myself, I too have had to do a great deal of work myself to figure this out, coming from a place of real stress and concern. So where do the grants go? They go to disease issues, primarily, in some cases. For family members who've died of a horrific disease, they say, geez, we can't have that happen, hopefully not to us either, let's put the money in that. They go to the universities that they graduated from because it was a great experience for them. Naturally, it should be a great experience for others. And they go to their religious institutions. By far, the largest recipient of money in the United States is religious institutions, not for philanthropic purposes, for purposes of making sure that the roofs are on right and the pastor is paid a good price. That's where most of our philanthropy is going, especially out of foundations. So to me, the practice has to change. The families should be invited to be on these boards only under the condition that they do the work to understand what they're doing, how to govern it properly. If not, let's put the community on. The community from where this happened, they should have the right to it. That's where the accountability should be. Boards are intended to be accountable to the people whose money they steward, your money. If you are not going to hold them to account, then let's put the communities on who will. Then you need to put people on staff who are coming from community as well. So to answer your next question, we have people working on our team now who come right out of the communities where we are trying to do our best to return resources. So you can look at my team online. They're fantastic, and I learn from them all the time, and they are constantly providing me the feedback I need to help run this place. And that's why I think we are making more and more grants into community. We do a lot of big institution stuff too, because that's what our board prior wanted to see. I have a new board who's not on our website right now, but they will be in March, and you'll see a big change. And that I'm excited about because we are all constantly learning how to be philanthropic while working inside a financial institution.
Fantastic. Well, Glenn, you've already answered the next question. So at the heart of bold philanthropy, of all-in giving, is this idea of trust. We know that trust is vital to philanthropy. Donors give to organizations they trust. Funders give to organizations they trust. And as individuals, we want to work with people that we trust, whether on the business side, on our investment side, but also on our philanthropic side. So that leads us to one question. Again, I am an optimist. In case you haven't picked that up already, I see a lot of possibility in this moment. And we are seeing funders being willing to give unrestricted grants, multi-year grants. That is just the start of this conversation. But also shift their funding model so that it is more community-based. The individuals who are doing the work, the movement leaders, they know the problems, they know the challenges best. How can we share power? So the next conversation is really how do we shift power and put trust at the heart of all these relationships? In other words, you can't have bold philanthropy without trust. So I'm going to let Iara start because she has a great set of insights really about what it means to trust in this moment.
I mean, so I've been reading a lot about risk capital and philanthropy as society's risk capital. That's our origin, right? I mean, we can do funding in a way that government can't, private sector can't. And a lot of it's because of the way we've been designed, like Glenn was saying. These foundations, unless you're Stupski or the few that are sunsetting, you're here for forever. And you only have to give 5%. Now, one benefit of that model is that you can actually walk long-term with groups, right? So you can actually partner with them over the long term and take risk, right? You can fund innovations and new ideas and be okay with failure because you're playing the decades-long game, not the year to year. And this concept of philanthropy as society's risk capital is one I hope we lean into, and I see us really going the different way. Right, again, like what's the return on investment? What's, how are, I want to see the solutions to the problems right now versus giving our communities a chance to fail fast, to fail forward, and really walk with them over the long term. I was meeting with a founder actually of an great online company, and asked him, how did you make all your money? How did you launch this company into the world? And he said, well, I failed 5 times first. And I didn't understand and still don't understand the venture capital world. And I said, wow, you failed 5 times before you got to this winning model. How did you convince other investors to fund you? After those other investors left you because you failed. And he just laughed and said, no, these investors fund me to fail. Because the more I fail, the closer and faster I get to the winning solution. Let's do that. Let's give our communities a chance to fail and fail fast as opposed to putting on the tap dance and the show and pretending like everything's great and here's my impact and here's what you want to see in terms of the return on your investment. Let us be in trust-filled relationships so we can be honest. Things aren't working and here's what I'm going to do differently. Because the more and the faster we allow our groups to fail, our communities, ourselves to fail, the faster we're going to get to the winning solutions. And I think that's at the heart of what trust looks like. At JustFund, we say money moves at the speed of trust. We mean a lot of things when we say that. And I don't just mean trust-based philanthropy, which is a beautiful, wrapping paper for a lot of the work that we're doing right now. Really beautiful concepts in there. But really, this is about building trust-filled relationships with each other and taking time to get to know each other, to fail fast, to fail forward, and be walking with each other over the long term.
So let's talk. We've been spending a lot of time on the 5%, the philanthropic side, but there's also the 95%, the investment side. And that is where I think there's a lot of room to grow. So according to our 2022 Giving USA report, American philanthropy reached an all-time high, $480 billion. So that is how much was given. And I think I just want to support what Glenn said. The largest destination is still religious congregations, but that's actually down significantly. It's a third of all. So the 2/3 goes to other types of organizations. Just to give you some context, in the 1960s, 2/3 of all American philanthropy went to religious congregations. So there's been significant disruption, and many more, some of the fastest growing areas today in philanthropy are the environment and also international causes. So there is a lot of scope for change. But where I think there has not been as much discussion is what's happening on the 95% side. We have some very good examples of organizations that have leaned into this, as Glenn has shared, but there are a lot of organizations that are still discovering that. And within the foundation space, half of the foundation segment is small family foundations. Many of them are less familiar with opportunities to work on that 95%. So we're going to start with Glenn here and ask the question, how do we get more movement, more boldness, this all-in giving concept with the foundations? What are the barriers that are stopping more foundations from embracing this? And specifically, this idea that we need to start with the problem we're trying to solve. So it may be a grant. It may be an equity investment. We should be agnostic about what tools are going to be used and start with the problem first. So maybe give us some concrete examples of how you are doing this or others in the field, because we know that the goal today is action, not just to have the conversation, but go home with some steps that we can all start to implement.
Take your money out of those investments and give it away. That's the only example I can give you. That's
Very
really,
simple.
That's
I love it.
I mean, I don't understand. I'm not the guy to ask this question, actually, because I don't get it.
Okay.
I just don't get it. I don't get perpetuity. I don't get why you would invest all that money in stuff that's working against something you're trying to achieve. I don't get any of it. Impact investing to me, I'm sorry, if you're in impact investing, I just haven't seen it yet. I hear a lot, whenever I talk to an impact, in fact, we invested in some. So disappointing. Like, you ask them, how's it going? Well, we've got the financial model figured out, but the impact part we're still working on. So and I've heard that 100 times, and I'm sure there are really great ones, and I'm sorry if I've offended anyone who's running a great one, but I just haven't seen it. So in my view, the way we have just kind of conceptualized what we need to do about the 95%, it's not 95 for us because we're a spend down, we're giving well beyond 5% annually. In fact, next year it's wild, it's so exciting. But where I've come to is one of the best things I think you can do is just take it to cash. You might actually be more philanthropic than your grant making if you take your portfolio to cash, because the damage you would have done won't happen. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. The way these firms work, it's just so frustrating, and that's putting it lightly. I just found out we have I found this out. I'll admit this to you. We have $2.3 million invested in something called the Energy and Minerals Group. Now, we inherited this because our founder passed away last year, so in came her trust. And so I was just recently invited to a conference of the Energy and Minerals Group where I'm going to learn about the latest in pipeline production, refinery production, and oil and gas investigation. Land that most certainly was taken, being done to that. And I have to now go to my staff. I don't think they're here today, but I will have to say to them, by the way, all that work we're doing to return land to indigenous communities, all that work we're doing to return land to black populations, we also own $2.3 million doing this. And I can't get out of it. It's private equity. I can sell it on the secondary market or donate it to somebody else who wants this toxic crap, but I can't get out of it until they tell me we can get out of it. The best position that we could have been in there was neutral. Don't make any money on it, don't lose any money on it. Just neutral. Because the damage we're going to do is far more, I think, than what we're trying to do on the grant side.
Okay.
So
Very
that's just
good.
my view on that.
It's interesting to hear you talk. I mean, we do not have a foundation, but if you think of, with half my staff, given $33 million moving, it's like roughly $11 million a year, 5%. It's as if we are a $220 million foundation, and we don't have that money stashed somewhere earning money on the money. So it can be done that you just give the money. You don't,
Right.
place it into a foundation.
That's right.
Um,
That's exactly right.
And I also want to ask you about the money that you say has been given away. Does that include money that's going into donor-advised funds? Because technically that counts as giving money away, when frankly it's not giving money away. It's parking it and leaving it
Yep.
and forgetting about it, because people do forget about it.
Yep.
It's not actually being put to work on the ground where get it really hard. I'm just going to focus on my work and I'm going to get to my philanthropy later. Well, this is not building a muscle of giving. You've got to get started. You've got to start today. Just start with it, and don't think it's a big hurdle. Just get started. It's a process, it's a journey, and people don't understand that. The old model is, you're old, you're going to give some money away. That we got to change the mindset around this, and it can't be a big task. It can't require a lot of research. You can do your job and also do some good and do some giving, and giving is joyful, and giving is about relationship, and it is about trust, and it is, a way to kind of move money in a way that's going to change our world for the better. The other reason that people told us is, I really want to give. I just don't know where and how to go about it. And that's that fear piece. I'm scared of getting it wrong. And we hear too much about the one nonprofit that's kind of been corrupt, and people hold that up and say, how do I know that people aren't going to squander my money? Well, people who have dedicated their lives to a cause, who are working every single day to solve problems, they're not going to squander your money. You need to partner with them and be with them and trust that they're doing the work. You should be begging them to take your money. We need to flip it on its head. I mean, the donor and the money should not have the power. The power should be with the people who are making the changes on the ground. So you should be fortunate enough to be part of an organization that's doing great work.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And the last piece here is, and in all these pieces are very human. We are all human beings. So the last piece is, well, if I give it away, I don't have it anymore. That's very human. But you know what? You can give half of it away. Give some of it away. Start that process.
Yes.
Right?
So Jen, very powerful point. Start somewhere. You don't have to have it all figured out. And you don't have to give it all away. Start with half of your DAF. So yes, thank you. That leads us to one other question that has been covered by everyone else. The last few years, we've dealt with unimaginable changes in our world, a global pandemic, an unprecedented economic crisis, not just in the United States, but in every single corner of the world. It's a crisis that's been broad-based. And then finally, which we cannot not talk about anymore, are just global racial and social justice movement. Even countries where I think these topics were off the radar are now speaking about it. I've had colleagues from Brazil that I've been fortunate to share with during the course of this conference. So as we understand how important it is to lift up these inequalities and not just talk about them, but actually act. I think in particular, the summer of 2020, I felt everything else was very difficult, but probably the most difficult was dealing with the racial and social justice movement. And going back to my parents were students in the 1960s, and I thought they would be very disappointed about what was going on in the United States. But interestingly, they were not. They were very hopeful. They said this movement is broad-based. We see people of all different races participating. And from the data side, the number of Americans giving to racial and social justice has increased. And for high net worth households from our Bank of America study, nearly a quarter of them donated to racial and social justice in 2020. So there's still a long way to go. Obviously, there are people that did not participate, but we're seeing much more interest in fighting inequality. Surprisingly, though, philanthropy has not been necessarily leading in this area. We've seen the business sector and government really lift up these issues. So one question that I think we all want to address is how philanthropy can lead on inequality. During the pandemic, we surveyed experts around the world, more than 100 of them, and they said if there's one thing philanthropy can do differently after 2020, it's lift up inequality. Gender-based, race-based, and all disability, obviously, and LGBTQ status. So what do you think we can do differently in our different roles to make sure that philanthropy can lead in this area, in addressing inequality of all different types?
You know, I'm reminded of an incredible campaign run by the Donors of Color Network, which is our first philanthropic network for donors of color. And they have a campaign, it's like the 30% campaign for climate pledge that foundations are asked to take. 30% of your funding should be going, if you're in climate, should be going to funding BIPOC-led, Black, Indigenous, people of color-led organizations. And the first step of that pledge is you have to understand what you're currently funding, and a lot of foundations can't participate because they have no idea what percentage of their portfolio is going to Black and Brown-led organizations. And that's the first step to being able to take a pledge like that, is knowing where you are right now. And so with JustFund, we're actually helping foundations take that pledge, so you can actually, pull bring your organizations into JustFund and learn what percentage of your existing portfolio is actually BIPOC-led. And while you're coming in to ask them, having those groups come in and ask them that question, they can then apply to any of the hundreds of other funds that are in the platform. But campaigns like that, to me, are really important. It's getting us to make sure that more of our funding is going to Black and Brown-led work, which is, again, we were doing this not just because of equity, but because we're strategic and we want to win, right? We believe that people closest to the issues are closest to the solution, so it's part of our strategy. So I think campaigns like that are really important. I also think we have to ask the questions of how are we giving? What are we doing? Because philanthropy, to me, there's a lot of, it's exclusionary. We fund who we know, right? So groups who don't have the benefit of the networks, who don't speak our language, who don't have the relationships, we don't find them. So we're exclusionary in that way, where it's super expensive, this whole process that we run. Right, the staff that we have to have, the way we're running our grants, and it's incredibly expensive for the smaller Black and Brown-led organizations on the front lines of social change to apply for funding. It's taking 15 to 25 hours to apply. That translates into about $5,000 per application. So who can actually afford to do that? Not these groups that we're trying to fund. So we are exclusionary, we're expensive, and then oftentimes we're extractive. Right? Because we want to learn with you. And so we give these grants, and then we want to be like in relationship with the group. Well, so I want to learn from you, and I'm taking these hour-long meetings with the executive director who's on the front lines here with their part-time staff. So we need to change our patterns of behavior, our expectations of groups, and how we're doing the giving if we want to actually, center communities that have been chronically underfunded in our giving, which I hope we all want to do and will do.
Jen, before you answer the question, I was also going to say collaboration is one theme that all of you have emphasized. As you tackle this big issue around inequality, how is collaboration playing into your work?
Collaboration and humanity. I think it's appealing to people's humanity and changing the mindset of the way people think about things. When someone's in pain, we're all in pain. And yes, there was an outpouring of white guilt after George Floyd, but that's not the place to give from. The place to give from is to recognize that we're all better off if we're all on equal ground. A more equitable society is a happier society, it's a more prosperous society, and we need to make this change as human beings, from one human being to another. And so I think it really is appealing to people as people, and trying to help people see how important it is for our society that we close this gap that is going to tear us apart unless we do something different.
One point on collaboration, we've just seen at JustFund, and I'm sure you all have seen the rise in collaborative funds, right? So if we, as our structures and our institutions, some of our institutions, we can't fund these smaller groups, right? We can only give 20% up to 20% of an organization's budget, but our smallest budget size is 100,000. So funding these small groups is out of the question based on some of our laws in our institutions. So we moved to collaborative funds where we pool our funding together, and then we can actually start to get to know organizations and build a relationship by trusting the folks who run the collaborative funds, the Edgar Villanuevas who run Decolonizing Wealth, or Alicia Sanchez-Gill who runs the Emergent Fund, and the hundreds of collaboratives that are out there run by people who have deep relationship with the communities they're distributing the money to. And as funders, we can fund those collaboratives, get to know the organizations, and hopefully start to bring those organizations into direct relationship with our institutions.
Any just quick thoughts, because I know we also want to...
I don't think I have much to add beyond what I've said already today. I think the only thing I would just push back on the question is, I just don't think, if by philanthropy you mean foundations or donor-advised funds.
So let me maybe say one last thing. Philanthropy, the word, I don't know how many people know what the word means. It means love of humanity. So Jen actually hit the nail on the head. It is, of course, foundations, but it's much bigger than that. When we look at the $480 billion, foundations are 20%, which means individuals are actually the largest slice of American philanthropy, 68%. So when we talk about philanthropy, you have your hat as foundation executive, but you also have your role as a donor, as a person in the work that you do, where you spend your money, where you invest, how you show up in the spaces, the time that your volunteerism, your testimony, all of those things matter. So I think our goal today is to expand that definition to make sure people understand it's not just that 20% of foundations, it's all of the work that's being done in the sector.
I'm glad you said that, and now I'm going to contract it down to 20% and just say, but that's a very good point, and that's key. But at the foundation level, I just don't think there's any role for foundations to lead in this effort. I think we are merely repositories of tax-sheltered money, and we just need to move it and take the lead of the groups on the ground. That's it. I mean, I don't think there's any other complicating factor than that. We do complicate things. That's what we do. And I will take credit for the fact that for a good part of my career, I played a role in complicating things by pressing ideas like strategic philanthropy and social entrepreneurship and impact investing. And all these things are just ways of getting, to some degree, around just giving the money.
Goes back to the JustFund, yes. Yeah. So I'm going to ask all of you to think about what gives you hope at this moment. I think we've all been through a lot as a society, as a global community. And when I think about what gives me hope, it's that for the first time since I have been in this role as a researcher, as a scholar, but also as a donor, I see people lifting up equity issues. And most importantly, what gives me hope is when I look at young people especially, they are so committed to racial and social justice. And this is not just what people say, we actually see it in the data. Many more young Americans are involved in giving to racial justice, volunteering, and they're expanding how they think about their giving. It's not just what they donate to, it's what they buy, it's their purchases, their investments, it's all of their work. So I call this all-in giving. So if there's one thing that inspires me in this moment is that most people are not just writing their checks and that's it, they're really thinking about how they can bring all of the assets that they have, their time, their talent, their testimony, and their networks to the issues and the causes they care about. So I'm going to ask our wonderful distinguished panelists to just share a few minutes on what gives you hope, what keeps you inspired. And if you have a call to action for our audience today, what can you do differently when you leave this panel? Because we want you to act. We want you to learn, listen, of course, but also take this knowledge and act. So maybe we'll start with Jen.
Well, what gives me hope is this next generation. They are incredible. The way they approach the world and the way they're approaching philanthropy is just as incredible. So they do definitely give me hope. There's a lot of wealth out there, and there's a lot of wealth. I just see so much abundance. There is so much abundance, and that does give me hope. We just need to unlock it and get it moving. And to trust, talk about trust, that it will be there. It's going to be there next year. There's money being made. It's not as though we have to hold on to it for next year. Let's get it moving now, because next year there's going to be more that we want to get moving.
Glenn, you have obviously committed to a path before the end of the decade, spend down. What gives you hope? What keeps you inspired? This is not easy work, as you say, spending down.
I think the agenda for this conference gives me hope. As I look through every panel and everything that's on there, I think this is great. I'm so happy that philanthropy is starting to actually challenge the mythologies and the narratives we've told ourselves, which are so destructive and counter to what we're really trying to do. So the fact that these conversations are going on and that things are changing, and that I don't know if they're changing, the fact that we're having the conversation is a good thing. To me, that gives me hope. The more we start to question the tenets of the financial system that we want to paper over with philanthropy, I think we get somewhere. And we might see more capital flowing through Just Give or anything you're doing, Yada, because every time I work with you on anything, I'm blown away by it. So I just hope that happens more.
Excellent. Well, we're going to give the last word to Iara.
You know, I was last week in Montgomery, Alabama. I don't know if folks have had the chance to get down there and see the Legacy Museum and the Lynching Memorial. That, was an incredible just experience. And while I was there, I was speaking at a conference with Cheryl Dorsey, who runs Echoing Green. And if you don't know Echoing Green, write that down, Echoing Green. Cheryl Dorsey, who's been doing this for 30 years, finding the world's most innovative entrepreneurs solving our most systemic problems. And she was sharing that just this year, they had 3,500 applications. People still want to solve our problems. We are not giving up. And that really gives me hope to see these entrepreneurs. They had this whole slate of entrepreneurs were all entrepreneurs of color. And I got to meet two of them, Morgan and Vanessa, who run Girl Trek, which is this amazing nonprofit here in the US working to extend the life expectancy of Black women by 10 years in 10 years. And it starts with walking. And I got to experience a Girl Trek with them. They're walking across 1,000 cities in the United States and telling us the history along the way, and we got to walk with them in Montgomery, Alabama. So these kinds of entrepreneurs in this room who are fighting for our future is what gives me hope.
Fantastic, yes. So we have a lot of work to do. You've heard that today, but we also have tremendous optimism in this room and in our world. There are young people at the front lines of social justice, racial justice, and tackling all our challenges. But there are also people of all different backgrounds. I started this story by telling you about my father, who has 4 daughters, and of course my younger brother, and he trained all of us to be just fighters for social justice. But what is important is that he was a he for she before there was a he for she. He taught us that women, girls could be anything. So what I encourage all of you to do is take this pledge with us today, the All-In Giving Pledge, in everything you do, not just in the seats you occupy as foundation leaders, as donors, as leaders, but in your personal lives. Find a young person, hopefully a person of color, that you can mentor. Invite people who aren't necessarily always in the room into the room. Invite community leaders to the spaces that you occupy. Figure out how you can, at a personal level, share power. I think we all can do something to make this a very different world. And the ultimate goal is that philanthropy should be leading on all of these things, all of these agendas. So I encourage all of you to be bold givers, but also all-in givers. And join me in thanking this amazing panel and fantastic discussion. Okay, and I think the panelists will be available to answer questions. So yes, we have a few minutes.
Now?
I don't think so. Not now.
I think it's time for lunch, but yes, over lunch, is that right? Let me ask the GPF team. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Lunch.
Voice.
Nice job.
And I hear you
Nice
have
job.
a 23-year-old and 25-year-old.
Yes.
I have a 22-year-old
Okay.
and a 14-year-old.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, wow. That's an age difference. So